In the last few years, we've seen legal action taken successfully against fake manufacturers of turbochargers, light bulbs, and they're passing off their product by using a well-known brand name. It is an issue in the industry, and particularly if you're in motor racing, where safety is something you have to take seriously. So Tom, for you, what would the worries be when it comes to fake parts on race cars?
You know, fake and counterfeit parts are a big concern, and the number one concern is obviously safety. And I think with these subjects, we automatically think about things that we associate with safety, so seat belts and your personal protective gear, helmets, hands devices, maybe brakes as well. But I think from a performance parts point of view, there is always a safety implication here as well. If you have a component failure on a car because it is a counterfeit or a lesser product, then this can also impact your safety. So it's important across the board.
What advice would you be giving to someone doing track days?
Yeah, I think this is so important to make sure that you're getting genuine materials, genuine products. And for me, I would always go to an authorised dealer to make sure that you're getting quality parts. There's auction sites and a large second-hand market for these things, but when it comes to your direct safety equipment, I think it's really important to spend a little extra and have that peace of mind that you know it's come from an authorised dealer.
They're attractive because they're cheaper, but they're cheaper for a good reason, and they will be made of inferior materials. They won't have had adequate testing, and as a result, and in the main, most of our products are safety critical. You're putting your life at risk.
It is becoming, as our parts and our testing is controlled by industry standards across Europe and the UK, such as TUV, and these prices, the cost to test is a lot, and the price of materials is increasing. Our product can seem very expensive, so as our price goes up, people do start to look around for cheaper alternatives. And the reason that these alternatives are cheaper are they do not do the testing, they use inferior materials. And an inferior material with no testing on a safety critical part, such as brakes, can lead to catastrophic failure. It's not really worth thinking about, and it's we've seen a rise in counterfeit parts. So we have two levels of testing. We test our parts in-house. Once we are happy with where we get a base level, and then we have in-house dynos which create scenarios, extreme scenarios of heat and cooling and how the product reacts, and then we use different kinds of metals for different scenarios, and then we have and then once we're happy with that, we then send it out external testing is so important because it gives you a feedback from a neutral party on how your product performs, and sometimes they're very extreme, and they test, especially brake discs, they test them to exploding. So they test them until they break, and they say this is the breaking point of this part, and these are very expensive. They cost thousands of pounds to test each individual product, and that is built into the cost of the parts.
If you look at the air filter industry or the exhaust industry, are there any horror stories that you've seen there?
In the exhaust industry, we have seen a growing number of counterfeit products being reported, and particularly in the European market, it's more of a challenge where the products do need testing and certification. And these have been flagged up where customers who felt they had an original Miltech product have been stopped at a roadside check, had the car inspected, and it was identified that the product had a TUV or a European E-mark number, but this was fake, and this resulted in cars being impounded and the customer then having to replace the system before they were allowed to take the vehicle back on the road. While generally an exhaust isn't so much a safety issue, it still can become that if the failure is due to poor quality materials or components resulting in the exhaust breaking or snapping and coming off while the vehicle's in motion and moving down the motorway or the autobahn. So we provide details on all of our systems of traceable batch numbers and have a clear list of authorised dealers, which again we always recommend people look at to ensure that they're getting the correct quality product that has been tested. The areas we see the counterfeits kind of forming into is with lower quality material, particularly use of non-stainless steel or lower grade like 409 stainless, which can corrode and rust. Also things like the welding quality and techniques used aren't at the same level and standard that a well manufactured, tested product would have. To make sure you're getting a genuine product, we always suggest that the consumer looks to the manufacturer's website, looks for the authorised dealer network. Most reputable manufacturers will have a published list of their worldwide networks of dealers. These will always be trained and be able to give the right advice as the best product that's suitable for the customer's car, and also ensure that the product is also correctly fitted, which is also another challenge with counterfeit products. They may not have the same fit and function as the original, which can result in other issues on the vehicle, which we've also seen where a counterfeit exhaust was not made correctly and came into contact with the plastic fuel tank on a vehicle and resulted in damage to the fuel tank. Fortunately, it didn't cause any fire, but was very close to burning through the fuel tank.
So Steve made a very good point about traceability, and all of our products will have a manufacturing batch code or a serial number that allows us to trace back to the batch within the factory, the processes, the tests, the results of those tests that were performed, and in fact trace back right to the raw material that the product was made from. So should something occur, we know exactly what was affected, where it's been sold, and can take proper action. Fortunately that's not occurred, but the system is in place. But with a fake part, you have no chance. There will be no traceability. There will be no motivation for them to put that in place. They probably don't want to be traced.
Well, yes, I was going to say in the air filter industry, there's perhaps less of a problem of straightforward fake parts because the values of the parts that we're making are not so high. The individual parts are cheaper things, and it's not a specific safety concern with an air filter. But what there are some very cheap brands out there, and they're perhaps not referring to the kind of thing Greg was talking about. They're not making sure their materials are of the highest standard and the quality of manufacture and so forth. All our air filters are actually marked with a traceable number, so that there is traceability even with our air filters. But our issues are more in the kind of dealing with very cheap products on the market rather than specifically fake products.
I think our readers, the sorts of cars that we feature in our magazines, they tend to be the more discerning owner and enthusiast who recognise the difference between a cheap part that might be either unbranded or at a very low price versus a known, recognised and respectable brand. They know that yes, it's going to cost a bit more, but hopefully what they're doing there is they're bringing quality and provenance to the car. I mean, they're really proud of this car, and whether it's a car that they bring out for events just to display as part of a club display, or actually it's a track car that they're going to go and really enjoy around a circuit like Silverstone. Like we have live action events at Silverstone and Mallory Park and Donington. A lot of our audience go to those tracks to actually drive those cars enthusiastically, and I think they know they want good suspension and good brakes, a nice sounding exhaust, and they want it to have a raughty induction noise. So, and therefore what we try and do, I guess, as sort of the voice of the enthusiast, is only really promote those cars that have those reputable parts on. There's always going to be cars that have been built at a weekend with their friends or whatever, but even those cars that we feature will use more quality parts as opposed to unbranded brand items. So I think that's what we try and do. We probably don't dwell on the negatives too much because as a media outlet, we don't want to dwell too much on the negatives for the fear of putting people off going into, if I've got a car that I'd like to modify, I don't want to sort of scare people with too many scare stories. However, there is probably more we could all do as an industry collectively, and us as the sort of a media sort of ambassador for it, to promote the differences between quality parts and cheap parts, and explain some of the things that you guys have talked about why those are differences, and perhaps do some coverage on the quality of the testing that you guys have to do, the regulatory requirements, and even the things that people need to look out for. because the internet has made it easy to buy parts cheaply and easily, isn't it? And often it's easy to read reviews, but they can be plagiarised or whatever. You know, there's a lot of that can make buying almost too easy and therefore fraught with lots of risk. But I think if we keep promoting the good quality products, the good quality brands, and highlight those through some proper showcase cars, then hopefully we're doing our best to promote the best side of the industry.
One of the reasons we set up the PAAA was to try to foster a kind of high quality industry group. In due course, it would be good to be able to use the PAA logo as a kind of mark of respectability, like a sort of standard award in a sense. So it is part of our aim in the PAAA to bring forward a sort of respectable. If they're PAA members, you can be sure they're making a quality product that's properly tested and be safe to use.
As Greg said about serial numbers, batch numbers, if you're a European company, you've been kind of forced into making sure your manufacturing game is spot on. Organisations like TUV, it's impossible to sell parts in Germany, or if you have a relationship with an OEM manufacturer, they hold you accountable, and that raises your game in the aftermarket. So if you work with an OEM company such as Ford or Volkswagen, they're at the forefront of leading parts that are up to standards and have quality control. So if you deal with them, they instill a standard, and I think it's for companies that maybe aren't as in the UK, we don't have the same standards. We don't have to, as Steve mentioned about e-marks and certain standards printed on the parts. In Germany and other countries in Europe, it's you cannot get away with putting cheap parts on. You'll be pulled up and you will be held accountable.
Nick's touched on the TUV aspects, and so looking at legislation more generally, what you find in Europe is that there are some countries, I mean the TUV is a German thing, but it applies in Switzerland and Austria as well. But then there are some countries where really modified parts aren't really allowed at all. And in the UK, in a sense, we just rely on product liability legislation. And as an industry, we're kind of in two minds about this, because on the one hand, the German industry knows what it has to do, it passes those tests, and it has products that are quite well secured then, because there's a big wall to jump to go into the market in Germany, and the TUV legislation kind of helps them in a way, even though it's expensive to get through those tests. And as a British industry, we're sort of frightened of the idea of having to do more testing and have that more expense, but we're losing out on the kind of security because the German government is behind the TÜV testing. It's not actually TÜV, it's testing for German government standards, and so they're kind of behind that and support the industry in a sense, even though it's expensive. So going forward into the future, we may need to look at the balance between the extra costs and the extra demands of having a tested product, or a more thoroughly tested product, against the cost of it, and the security that it could give us.
Part of the reason we attend shows like Autosport and are part of the Performance and Tuning Car Show is to talk to customers, allow them to come and ask questions about the products, understand the differences and the advantage of buying genuine products from proven manufacturers.